Rabbinic tradition in the first century explicitly taught that a man should never speak to a woman in public, not even his own wife. In Roman and Jewish courts, a woman's testimony was legally worthless. Society treated them as invisible, powerless, and completely silent. Yet, despite this absolute cultural lockdown, the four Gospels record Jesus having exactly 12 distinct, highly intentional conversations with specific women. Each conversation directly shattered a specific legal or societal taboo of his day. The Gospel writers were meticulous craftsmen, and these 12 documented conversations set up a revolutionary pattern that escalates across Jesus' 3-year ministry in ways that most readers completely miss. By looking closely at every woman Jesus spoke to, you'll see a deliberate blueprint designed to dismantle ancient shame, rewrite legal status, and entrust the most important announcement in human history to the very people the world ordered to stay silent. Jesus' spoken words to women were not random acts of politeness. They were deliberate acts of theological warfare against systemic shame. By tracing these unique interactions across Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, a powerful shift becomes obvious. In a world where women were visually and legally invisible, Jesus' spoken words didn't just offer comfort, they conferred immediate, undeniable status and authority. To understand how Jesus shattered these ancient rules, we have to look closely at the actual words he used. In the original language of the New Testament, ancient Greek, words carry deep social meaning. When Jesus spoke to women, he chose his words like a master builder selecting tools to repair a broken foundation. He did not use casual or dismissive language. Instead, he used specific titles that acted like heavy-duty machinery, lifting women out of societal rejection and placing them into positions of honor. The first crucial word is gine, which translates directly to woman. To our modern ears, calling someone woman might sound a bit cold, distant, or even rude, but in the ancient Greek world, it was actually a title of high respect. It was the cultural equivalent of saying, my lady, or madam. When Jesus used this word in moments of healing or correction, he was instantly pushing back against a culture that treated women as property. He was addressing them with the kind of dignity usually reserved for royalty. It was a verbal shield, protecting them from the everyday disrespect of a harsh society. Even more powerful is the second word, thegater, which means daughter. The data here is stunning. Across all four gospel narratives, Jesus uses this intimate term only one single time. He saves it for a specific woman who had been a legal outcast for 12 long years due to a chronic bleeding condition. In that culture, her illness made her ritually unclean, meaning she was completely cut off from her community, her temple, and human touch. She was a social ghost. When Jesus calls her daughter, it is a massive theological breakthrough. Think of it as an immediate legal adoption papers signed in public. Before he even addresses her physical sickness, he fixes her social status. By calling her daughter, he tells the crowded room that this rejected woman is now a vital part of God's immediate family. He uses language to transform her from an untouchable outsider into a cherished insider. For Jesus, words were never just cheap comfort. They were powerful, data-backed tools used to rewrite a person's legal and spiritual identity on the spot. To truly understand how revolutionary Jesus was, we must look at the strict laws that controlled everyday life back then. The first category of Jesus' conversations involves women who were completely unnamed and considered ritually unclean. A prime example of this is found in the stories of Matthew and Mark, which follow a woman who had suffered from a severe bleeding condition for 12 painful years. According to ancient Levitical laws, this constant bleeding made her a walking biohazard to her community. The rules were absolute. Anything or anyone she touched automatically became unclean too. For over a decade, she was forced to live in total isolation, unable to hug her family, attend community gatherings, or even walk through a crowd without causing a religious emergency. When she spots Jesus in a dense crowd, she does something incredibly risky. She sneaks up behind him and secretly touches the edge of his clothes, believing it will cure her. Instantly, her bleeding stops. Most readers assume this is the end of the story. She gets her miracle and quietly disappears back into the crowd. But Jesus completely changes the game. He stops everything, looks around, and forces a public conversation. Why would he do that? Why expose a terrified woman who just wanted to be invisible? The reason is brilliant and deeply strategic. Under strict religious law, her touch had technically defiled Jesus, making him unclean. If she just walked away healed in secret, the community would still view her as a dangerous outcast, and rumors would spread that she had contaminated a teacher. By calling her out and speaking to her publicly, Jesus completely reverses the flow of uncleanness. He acts like a powerful filter that neutralizes a toxic substance. Instead of Jesus catching her defilement, she catches his wholeness. When he looks at her and calls her daughter in front of everyone, he isn't just being nice. He is presenting hard, public proof to the entire community that she is fully restored. He uses a public conversation to clear her name, prove she is no longer a biohazard, and safely welcome her back into the human family. Once the baseline of religious uncleanness was shattered, Jesus took his blueprint a step further to dismantle heavy social and cultural boundaries. We see this master plan unfold perfectly in the famous story of the Samaritan woman at the well, found in John chapter 4. This encounter is highly significant because it stands as the longest recorded one-on-one conversation Jesus has with anyone in the entire gospel narrative. Jesus did not just happen to pass by this well. He intentionally chose this spot to systematically break down every single wall his culture had spent centuries building. To understand the sheer weight of this moment, we have to look at the three massive layers of separation that stood between them. The first layer was ethnic. He was a Jew and she was a Samaritan, two groups of people who absolutely detested each other and refused to share the same drinking cups. The second layer was gender. As we already learned, first-century rules strictly forbade a man from speaking to a woman in public. The third and final layer was moral. This woman had been married 5 times before and was currently living with a man who was not her husband, making her a social outcast even among her own people. Jesus knowingly walked right past all 3 of these giant warning signs. He did not care about the cultural pollution rules. Instead, he treated her like a valued student, discussing deep theological truths with her in broad daylight. The data proves just how shocking this behavior was to the people of that time. When Jesus' closest followers returned from buying food, John chapter 4, verse 27, records their raw reaction. They marveled that he was talking with a woman. They were completely stunned. In their minds, a religious teacher speaking alone with a woman, and a Samaritan woman with a complicated past, no less, was an absolute scandal. But Jesus was not acting on a random whim. He was systematically checking every single box of societal exclusion and intentionally crossing the line. By engaging in this long, public discussion, he proved that no cultural barrier, no painful history, and no social rule could block a person from receiving God's grace. He rewrote the rules of social interaction, proving that people who society labeled as outsiders were actually the exact ones he came to seek and save. If someone asked you right now what we've established, here it is. Jesus didn't just happen to run into these women. He broke religious laws of cleanness to speak to the bleeding woman, and he broke centuries of racial and gender apartheid to speak to the Samaritan woman. He was rewriting the rules of access to God. He took the very people the ancient world tried to hide and put them right at the center of his message. This was a deliberate, data-backed strategy to show that everyone has equal value in his kingdom, no matter what society says. Studying these deep details in the text completely changes how we read our Bibles today. It shows us that there are no accidental details in these ancient accounts. If you want to keep uncovering these hidden biblical patterns and see how Jesus continues to flip the script, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. I would also love to hear from you, so please drop a comment below sharing which woman's story has impacted you the most so far. Let's keep exploring these powerful truths together. This brings us to one of the most unusual and misunderstood conversations in the entire New Testament. In the accounts of Mark chapter 7 and Matthew chapter 15, Jesus travels outside Jewish territory into a foreign Gentile area. A Syrophoenician woman approaches him, desperately begging him to heal her daughter, who is suffering from a terrible demon. Jesus responds with words that sound incredibly shocking and harsh to modern readers. It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. At first glance, it looks like Jesus is insulting her and slamming the door in her face. But if we zoom in on the data and look at the original Greek language, we discover a completely different picture. In the ancient world, street dogs were wild, dangerous scavengers. But Jesus did not use the word for those vicious street dogs. Instead, he used the specific word kinarion, which means little household puppies. By using this softer word, Jesus was changing his tone. He was not trying to crush her spirit. He was actually setting up a clever verbal test, inviting her into a battle of wits to see how she would respond.
What happens next is a brilliant theological payoff. Instead of getting offended or giving up, this foreign woman leans right into the analogy with amazing courage and quick thinking. She responds, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." She basically says, even if I am just a puppy at the table, there is still more than enough of your power to heal my girl. Jesus is absolutely blown away by her answer. He openly marvels at her, highly commends her immense faith, and grants her request, healing her daughter instantly. Think about how incredible this is. Jesus intentionally allows a foreign woman to win a theological argument in public. He does this to teach his followers a massive lesson. He proves that having a right relationship with God does not depend on your family background, your race, or your gender. The only true currency in God's kingdom is bold, trusting faith. This entire pattern of revolutionary conversations leads directly to the ultimate climax of the New Testament. In John chapter 20, we find ourselves at the empty tomb on Easter morning. Jesus has officially risen from the dead, and the entire universe has changed forever. This is the single most important moment in Christian history. A massive question hangs in the air. Who will get the very first conversation with the resurrected king? If a human writer were inventing this story to impress the ancient world, they would have chosen a powerful king, a high priest, or at least one of the male disciples. Instead, the pattern of elevating the forgotten intensifies to an unbreathtaking level. The very first person Jesus speaks to is Mary Magdalene. As she stands outside the tomb weeping, Jesus appears and speaks her name. Then he gives her a direct command: "Go to my brothers and say to them." He instructs her to deliver the news of his resurrection to his closest male followers. To fully grasp the deep reality of this moment, we have to look back at the historical data we uncovered at the very beginning. Remember, in first century culture, a woman's testimony was legally worthless. A woman was not allowed to speak in court to convict a criminal or even to validate a simple business contract. Society explicitly ruled that women could not be trusted to witness to the truth. Yet Jesus completely bypasses this legal lockdown. He appoints Mary Magdalene to be the apostle to the apostles. He deliberately makes a woman the primary legal witness for the absolute foundation of the Christian faith. This detail provides incredible proof that the gospel accounts are true. If the Gospels were a fabricated myth made up by ancient writers, no author would have ever written the story this way. They would have known that using a woman as the star witness would make their story look foolish to the courts of their day. They included this detail because it is exactly what happened. It is historically accurate precisely because it was so shockingly revolutionary. Jesus spent his entire ministry using his words to lift women out of the shadows, and in his greatest moment, he trusted them with the biggest announcement the world had ever heard. This ancient blueprint is not just a collection of old stories about people who lived thousands of years ago. It carries a powerful message that still changes lives today. Consider the true story of a modern woman named Sarah.
Sarah grew up in a very strict traditional community where she was constantly told that her voice did not matter. She was taught that men were the only ones who could understand deep spiritual truths, and that her main job was to stay quiet and blend into the background. For years, she felt completely invisible, carrying a heavy weight of shame and believing that her thoughts and prayers had no real value to God. One quiet evening, Sarah sat down alone in her room and began reading John chapter 4. As she carefully read through the long conversation between Jesus and the Samaritan woman, something incredible clicked in her mind. She looked at the historical facts of the story and realized that the creator of the universe had intentionally altered his travel plans. He spent his afternoon sitting under the hot sun by a dusty well, specifically waiting for a rejected outcast just to have a deep theological discussion with her. That realization completely shattered Sarah's old way of thinking. She realized that Jesus did not view women as secondary characters in his story. Seeing how Jesus treated that Samaritan woman helped Sarah recognize her own immense value. The heavy burden of worthlessness she had carried for decades simply melted away. This is the beautiful bridge that connects the ancient text to our modern world. The exact same pattern we see in the Gospels applies to your life right now. Just as Jesus stopped everything in the middle of a massive, pressing crowd to hear the voice of one bleeding woman, he still stops for the invisible today. If you have ever felt hidden, ignored, or told that your voice does not carry weight, you can look directly at the data of Jesus' life. He routinely broke the rules of powerful institutions to reach people in the shadows. He still stands ready to listen to you, to speak to you, and to lift you up out of any shame the world has tried to put on you. When we look back across all of this powerful evidence, the final conclusion is absolutely clear. Every single word Jesus spoke to women in the Gospels was not a casual interaction. It was a covenantal restoration. He did not just heal their physical bodies or fix their immediate problems. He gave them their names back. He took people who had been stripped of their identity by a cruel society and completely rebuilt their lives from the ground up, using his public conversations to restore their legal, social, and spiritual honor. Now, let's take all of this historical data and apply it directly to your life today. You might currently find yourself in a difficult season where you feel completely misjudged, unseen, or left out. Perhaps people around you have told you that your past mistakes or your background completely disqualify you from ever being a voice for God. It is easy to internalize those negative messages and start believing that you are invisible to the Creator. But when those thoughts creep in, I want you to remember the closing image of this amazing journey. Think back to the harsh, ancient courtrooms of the first century where women were completely silenced and told their words meant nothing. Contrast that dark picture with the glorious courtroom of heaven. In that heavenly courtroom, Jesus stands up to speak directly to you, overriding every negative voice and human rule that has ever tried to hold you down. He is the ultimate authority, and his evaluation is the only one that truly matters. May you walk through this week knowing that the same Jesus who broke every strict rule of religious tradition just to see and speak to the forgotten is looking directly at you. He is calling you a daughter, and he is trusting you with his vital message. If this deep dive into the scriptures has strengthened your faith and helped you see God's heart more clearly, please share it with another woman who needs to remember her true worth today. Thank you for studying with me, and I will see you in the next video as we continue to unlock the beautiful patterns of Scripture together.